The metallic sound of the key turning in the lock echoed down the empty corridor of the Henderson mansion. Rosa Alvarez adjusted the cleaning trolley and pushed open the heavy oak door leading to the attic. After 23 years working as a cleaner in that house in Providence, Rhode Island, it was the first time she had been instructed to clean that particular room. "We need to organize the attic for the sale of the house," Benjamin Henderson III had said that morning, without taking his eyes off the Wall Street Journal. The news of the sale of the property that had belonged to the family for generations surprised all the employees, especially as it came just 3 months after the death of Margaret Henderson, the patriarch's wife. Rosa climbed the creaking steps cautiously, feeling the weight of her 58 years with every step. The light coming through the dusty skylights revealed a maze of furniture covered in white sheets, old trunks and piles of boxes that seemed to contain decades of Henderson family history. As she methodically organized the space, Rosa couldn't help but think of her husband, Carlos. He had worked as the estate's gardener for 30 years until his sudden death 5 years ago. The pension promised by the Henderson Company never arrived, leaving her as the sole provider for her family. Mrs. Rosa? The voice of Lucia, her 17-year-old daughter who occasionally helped with the cleaning, sounded from the foot of the stairs. "Do you need any help up there?" "No, mijita. Get on with the library. It'll take a while, but I can handle it." While moving an old Victorian dressing table, Rosa noticed something fall out of one of the drawers. Bending down with difficulty, her fingers found a book with a faded red cover. It was a diary, the pages yellowed by time, Margaret Henderson's elegant handwriting filling each page. Rosa knew she shouldn't read it, but something on the first page captured her attention. "What Benjamin did is unforgivable. I can no longer carry this secret." With trembling hands, Rosa began to read. Each page revealed a web of lies and fraud stretching back decades. Benjamin Henderson III had systematically embezzled millions from the employees' pension fund, including money that should have gone to Carlos and dozens of other retired workers. Margaret documented everything meticulously: dates, amounts, offshore accounts, names of shell companies. It was a complete dossier of the corruption that had made the Henderson family even richer at the expense of their loyal employees. "My God," Rosa murmured, sitting down in an old armchair as tears streamed down her face. There was the explanation for so many families, including her own, who had been left destitute after years of dedicated service. A noise downstairs made her quickly put the diary away in her uniform. Benjamin Henderson III had arrived early from the office, his authoritative voice echoing down the corridor as he spoke on the phone about the sale of the property. Rosa descended the attic stairs with her heart racing, the weight of the diary seeming to burn through the fabric of her uniform. Her hands trembled as she pushed the cleaning trolley down the corridor, avoiding looking directly at Benjamin as she passed him. That evening, in her small apartment on the east side of Providence, Rosa sat at the kitchen table with Lucia and her eldest son, Miguel, a law student at Rhode Island University. The diary lay open between them, its pages telling a story of greed and betrayal. "This explains everything," said Miguel, flipping through the pages with growing indignation. The employees' pension fund was solid until 2008, when it was supposedly hit by the financial crisis. But according to these notes from Ms. Henderson, that's exactly when the embezzlement started on a massive scale. Lucia, who dreamed of becoming a journalist, was already furiously taking notes. "We need to do something, Mom. It can't stay like this." Rosa looked at the photo of Carlos on the wall, his gentle smile framed by the Henderson's gardener's uniform. "Yes, Majida, we're going to do something. But we need to be smart. Benjamin Henderson III has a lot of power in this town." Miguel closed the diary with determination. "I'm going to consult some professors at the law school. Discreetly, of course. With this evidence, we can put together a solid case. And I can investigate more about the companies mentioned here," Lucia added. "I'm sure I'll be able to find more connections." Rosa watched her children, proud of their strength and determination. The weight of the truth she carried was immense. But for the first time in years, she felt hope. Not just for her family, but for all the others who had been harmed by the Hendersons' greed. That night, as she put the diary away in a safe place, Rosa made a silent promise to Carlos and all the other workers who had dedicated their lives to that mansion. The truth would come out, and justice would be done, even if it meant facing one of the most powerful families in Rhode Island. What Rosa didn't know was that her discovery would trigger a series of events that would forever change not only her life, but the fate of dozens of families in Providence. The battle that was about to begin would be much bigger than she could have imagined. The next morning, Miguel couldn't concentrate on his law school classes. The contents of Margaret Henderson's diary occupied every thought, every moment of silence. During the break between classes, he went to the office of Professor Diana Walsh, a specialist in labor law known for her unwavering integrity. "Professor Walsh, can I speak to you in private?" Miguel asked after knocking lightly on the ajar door. The professor, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and piercing eyes, gestured for him to come in. "Of course, Miguel. You look worried." Miguel closed the door and sat down, choosing his words carefully. Hypothetically speaking, if someone discovered evidence of fraud in a corporate pension fund, what would be the best legal course of action? Diana removed her reading glasses, her gaze becoming sharper. "That doesn't sound like a hypothetical question to me, Miguel. We're talking about Henderson Industries, aren't we?" Miguel's startled response was enough. The teacher sighed, getting up to close the blinds in her office. Rumors about irregularities at Henderson Industries have been circulating for years, but no one has come up with any concrete proof. The patriarch has deep connections with local judges and politicians. Meanwhile, at the Henderson mansion, Rosa continued her daily work with a heavy heart. Every time she came across Benjamin Henderson III in the corridors, she had to hold back the urge to confront him. The man seemed more agitated than usual, making constant phone calls and holding meetings behind closed doors. During her lunch break, Rosa received a text message from Lucia. "Mom, I found out something important. I can't talk on the phone. I'll meet you after work." The afternoon dragged on with palpable tension. Around 4 o'clock, Rosa noticed unusual movement in Benjamin's office. Men in suits came and went, carrying boxes of documents. While pretending to clean the adjacent corridor, she managed to pick up fragments of conversations about offshore transfers and sensitive documentation. At 6 o'clock, Rosa found Lucia waiting at the bus stop near the mansion. Her daughter was visibly agitated. "Mom, I looked up the companies mentioned in the diary. 3 of them were registered in the Cayman Islands in the same week that the pension fund started showing significant losses. And guess what? The lawyer who signed all the documents is Marcus Sullivan, the same one who was organizing the sale of the mansion." Rosa felt a chill. Marcus Sullivan had been a constant presence at the mansion in recent weeks, always in closed meetings with Benjamin. When they arrived home, they found Miguel talking to Professor Walsh in the living room. The introductions were brief, and soon they were all poring over Lucia's diary and discoveries. "This is pure dynamite," commented Diana, examining Margaret Henderson's meticulous notes. "But we need to proceed with extreme caution. Benjamin Henderson III isn't just rich, he's dangerous." "What do you mean, dangerous?" asked Rosa, feeling her stomach tighten. Diana hesitated before continuing. 5 years ago, an accountant for Henderson Industries started asking questions about discrepancies in the company's accounts. 2 weeks later, he was involved in a car accident. The case was dismissed as a tragedy, but many suspects sabotage. The silence that followed was heavy. Rosa remembered how Carlos, her husband, had mentioned irregularities in the company's accounts weeks before his death from natural causes. "We need more allies," said Miguel. "Other former employees who have been harmed. The more people who know the truth, the harder it will be for the Hendersons to cover it up." Lucia was already at her laptop, researching. "I found a list of ex-employees who retired between 2008 and 2018. I can start contacting them discreetly. Not by phone or email," Diana warned. "Over the next few weeks, we'll meet with small groups in different places. Cafes, parks, public places where we won't attract attention." Rosa watched the movement in her small room, feeling a mixture of pride and fear. Her children and Professor Walsh were already strategizing, discussing legal precedents and possible allies in the local press. A noise in the street caught her attention. Through the window, he noticed a dark car stopped on the other side of the street, with 2 men in it. He could swear they were the same ones he had seen leaving the Henderson mansion earlier. "We need to be more careful," said Rosa, closing the curtains. "I think we're being watched." Diana approached the window and nodded gravely. They must already suspect that something is going on. Benjamin Henderson is not a man to leave loose ends. "What do we do now?" asked Lucia, her voice betraying concern. "We carry on," Miguel replied with determination. "But we need to outsmart them. Every step needs to be calculated, every move planned." Rosa picked up Margaret Henderson's diary and hugged it to her chest. Those pages contain not only secrets, but the hope of justice for dozens of families. They couldn't back down now, even if the road ahead seemed increasingly dangerous. "For Carlos," she whispered, "and for all the others who were betrayed by Benjamin Henderson." The night wore on as the small group continued their planning, unaware that their actions had already set in motion events that would shake the power structures in Providence. The battle for the truth was just beginning, and the price of justice could be higher than any of them imagined. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the empty corridors of the Providence Public Library. Miguel and Lucia had chosen this location for their first meeting with Janet Martinez, a former secretary at Henderson Industries who had worked directly with Benjamin Henderson III for 15 years. "He was always meticulous with his files," Janet explained quietly, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she opened an old folder. But in 2008, something changed. He started closing his office door during phone calls, something he never did before. Miguel examined the documents Janet had kept over the years. Copies of memos, records of suspicious bank transfers, cryptic emails. Each piece fitted perfectly with the information in Margaret Henderson's diary. "Why did you keep all this?" asked Lucia, amazed at the amount of evidence. Janet looked around before answering. "Because Carlos, your father, came to see me weeks before he died. He suspected something was wrong with the pension fund and asked me to keep an eye on it." The revelation hit the brothers like a punch in the gut. Meanwhile, at the Henderson mansion, Rosa was facing her own challenges. Benjamin had stepped up the security presence, installing additional cameras and hiring guards to patrol the corridors. "Ms. Alvarez," Benjamin's voice surprised her as she cleaned out her office. "I've noticed that you've been spending a lot of time in the attic lately." Rosa kept her composure, years of practice at hiding her emotions. "Yes, sir. As you asked, I'm organizing everything for the sale." Benjamin watched her for a long moment, his cold eyes calculating something. "You know, I've always admired your loyalty. It would be a shame if something happened to your work visa, wouldn't it?" The veiled threat did not go unnoticed. That evening, at an emergency meeting in Professor Walsh's apartment, the group discussed their options. "He's closing in," said Rosa, recounting her conversation with Benjamin. "And now we know that Carlos was investigating before he died." Diana typed furiously on her laptop. "I managed to arrange a meeting with federal prosecutor James Morrison. He has a history of taking on corporate corruption cases, even against powerful opponents." "But can we trust him?" asked Miguel, remembering the Hendersons' political connections. "James was my student 20 years ago," replied Diana. "He's one of the few who hasn't been bought by the Hendersons' money." Lucia, who had spent the afternoon researching, shared her latest findings. "I found a pattern in the accidents that happened to people who crossed the Hendersons' path. 5 cases in the last 10 years, all quickly dismissed by the local police." The group was interrupted by urgent knocks on the door. It was Janet Martinez, panting and visibly upset. "Someone broke into my house," she said, entering quickly. "They went through everything, but they didn't take anything valuable. They were looking for documents." The news sent waves of concern through the group. Diana immediately started making calls, organizing a safe place for Janet to stay. "We need to act faster," said Miguel. "We're taking more risks every day." Rosa picked up Margaret's diary, its pages now even more precious. Margaret knew this would happen. There's an entry here from a few days before her death, saying that she feared for the safety of everyone who knew the truth. The mention of Margaret's death provoked a thoughtful silence in the group. Her sudden cardiac arrest had occurred shortly after a heated argument with Benjamin, according to the mansion staff. "I found something interesting about Marcus Sullivan," Lucia added, showing her notebook. Before he became the Hendersons' lawyer, he worked for a private security firm specializing in solving problems for wealthy clients. Diana frowned. That explains a lot. Sullivan isn't just a lawyer. He's the Hendersons' cleaner. The group worked late into the night, organizing documents and planning their next steps. The meeting with the federal prosecutor was scheduled for 3 days from now, enough time to organize all the evidence. When they finally got home, Rosa found a brown envelope in her mailbox. Inside was just one old photo. Carlos talking to Margaret Henderson in the garden of the mansion, weeks before his death. On the back of the photo, a typed message. Some secrets must remain buried. Rosa felt her heart race. The photo wasn't just a threat, it was confirmation. Carlos and Margaret had discovered the truth together, and both had paid the ultimate price for it. That night, while her children slept, Rosa made digital copies of all the pages of the diary, sending them to different secure emails. If anything happened to her, the truth would survive. The next day would be crucial. Diana had organized a secret meeting with other former Henderson employees in an abandoned church on the outskirts of Providence. The truth was about to gain more allies, but also more enemies. And somewhere in the city, Marcus Sullivan was receiving a call from Benjamin Henderson III, his voice conveying a clear order. Clean up this mess. Whatever the cost. The abandoned St. Mary's Church stood like a shadow against the gray Providence sky. Inside the decaying building, 25 former employees of Henderson Industries listened in shocked silence as Diana Walsh presented the evidence collected from Margaret Henderson's diary. My husband died believing he had lost everything in the 2008 crisis, said Martha Collins, a 72-year-old former accountant, her voice breaking. He worked for the Hendersons for 40 years, and in the end, we barely had enough money for his medication. Miguel and Lucia documented each testimony, while Rosa watched from the back row, her heart heavy with each new story of lives destroyed by the Hendersons' greed. The meeting, however, was abruptly interrupted when Janet Martinez burst in through the side door. Black cars approaching, she warned, panting. At least 3 of them. Diana quickly organized the evacuation of the group from the back of the church. As the ex-employees hurried out, Rosa noticed something familiar on one of the old gravestones in the adjacent cemetery. The name of Margaret Henderson. Wait, she whispered, approaching the headstone. There's something here. Carved discreetly into the marble base was a sequence of numbers. Miguel quickly photographed them before heading for the emergency exit. Seconds later, male voices echoed through the main nave of the church. Back in the secure apartment provided by Diana, the core group gathered to analyze the numbers found on the headstone. It's a sequence of coordinates followed by a code, Lucia explained, after several hours of research. It points to a safe deposit box at the First Providence Bank. Margaret left more clues, said Rosa, leafing through the diary. She knew she was in danger and prepared a contingency plan. The discovery, however, brought new challenges. First Providence Bank was known for its discretion and strict security. Accessing a vault without the appropriate credentials would be practically impossible. Maybe we don't need to access the vault, Miguel suggested, an idea forming. If we can prove its existence and its connection to the frauds, the federal prosecutor can get a warrant. The meeting with Attorney Morrison was scheduled for the following morning, but the events of the night brought a new urgency to the case. Diana received an anonymous call informing her that Marcus Sullivan had requested access to several old bank records. They're trying to cover their tracks, she concluded, hanging up the phone. We need to act before all the evidence disappears. Rosa decided to return to the Henderson mansion that evening, taking advantage of her cleaning shift to look for more clues. In the main office, while pretending to clean, she observed Benjamin in a heated discussion on the phone. I don't care what it costs, he vociferated. That safe needs to be emptied by tomorrow. Rosa's heart raced. They knew about the safe too. But how? The answer came from an unexpected source. Harold Thompson, the Hendersons' retired butler, had attended the meeting at the church and was now contacting Miguel with crucial information. Margaret told me about the safe days before she died, Harold revealed in an encrypted call. She knew that Benjamin would find out eventually, so she created a second safe deposit box in another bank under a false name. The information was valuable, but time was running out. Benjamin Henderson III had called a press conference for the following morning, where he would announce the sale of Henderson Industries to an international conglomerate. "It's a distraction," explained Diana. "With the sale, all the old records will be transferred and potentially lost in the process." Lucia, who had gone undercover as an intern at a local newspaper, found out more details about the sale. The buyer is a shell company registered in the same Cayman Islands mentioned in the diary. It's all an elaborate money laundering. The evening progressed, and the group worked frantically to organize all the evidence before the meeting with Attorney Morrison. Rosa couldn't stop thinking about Carlos, about how her husband had died, trying to expose the truth. "I found something," announced Miguel, looking through old bank records. In the last days of her life, Margaret made a series of small deposits at different branches of the bank. Together, they form a pattern. Diana examined the numbers. "Their coordinates again." She left a trail of crumbs for us to follow. A noise in the street caught the group's attention. Through the window, they saw Marcus Sullivan getting into one of the black cars that had been following them for days. He was carrying a briefcase that looked identical to the one Janet Martinez had shared with them. "Janet," whispered Rosa, picking up the phone. Her calls, however, went straight to voicemail. Fear spread through the group. The race against time had turned into a race for survival. Every person who knew the truth about the Hendersons was in danger. "Tomorrow is the day," said Diana, her voice determined. "Either we expose everything to Attorney Morrison, or Benjamin Henderson wins again." Rosa looked at Carlos' photo in her wallet, then at her children, who were risking everything for justice. The truth had cost lives, but now it could save many more. The dawn would bring not only a new day, but the decisive moment in their fight for justice. And while Providence slept, the Hendersons prepared their last and most desperate move to silence the truth once and for all. The morning of the meeting with Federal Prosecutor James Morrison arrived with an alarming discovery. Janet Martinez had disappeared. Her bed in the secure apartment was untouched, and her phone was still switched off. Diana Walsh coordinated discreet searches as the group prepared for the meeting that could change everything. "I just got this," said Lucia, showing her cell phone. It was an anonymous message with a photo. Janet being escorted into a black car by two men in suits. The image had been taken at 3:47 in the morning in front of the building where she was staying. "Marcus Sullivan," muttered Miguel, recognizing one of the men in the photo. "They're eliminating witnesses one by one." Rosa felt the weight of the diary in her bag as the group made their way to the federal prosecutor's office. The streets of Providence looked different that morning, more threatening, as if every shadow could hide a hostile observer. The meeting with Morrison was interrupted before it even began. His assistant greeted them with disturbing news. The prosecutor had suffered a domestic accident during the night and was hospitalized. "This is no coincidence," said Diana, leading the group quickly out of the federal building. "Benjamin Henderson is always one step ahead." On the way back, Miguel noticed something in the bank records they were analyzing. "Look at this. Margaret made one last deposit on the day of her death. The amount is different from the others, but it follows the same pattern of coordinates." Lucia quickly decoded the numbers. "It's an address in the old industrial area of Providence, an abandoned warehouse." "We need to go there," said Rosa, remembering the latest diary entries. Margaret mentioned that she had set up an insurance policy in case anything happened to her. The group split up. Diana went to check on Morrison's condition at the hospital, while Rosa and her children headed to the warehouse. The place was a rusting industrial skeleton, surrounded by other equally abandoned buildings. "Over there," Miguel pointed, spotting a side entrance partially hidden by overgrown vegetation. Inside, the air was heavy with decades of abandonment. Following the precise coordinates, they found a metal trapdoor under rubble. Inside was a security box protected by a digital code. "The numbers on the gravestone," Rosa recalled. Miguel typed them in, and the box opened with a soft click. The contents were explosive: an external hard drive, dozens of original documents, and a handwritten letter from Margaret Henderson, dated the day of her death. "Dear Rosa," the letter began, surprising everyone. "If you are reading this, it means that you have found my diary and followed the clues. I trust you because Carlos did. He came to me with suspicions about the fraud, and together we discovered the truth. Benjamin discovered our plan, and the letter was interrupted by a metallic noise. Footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Marcus Sullivan had followed them. "Go out the back," whispered Rosa to her children. "Take all this to Diana." "Mom, don't," Lucia began, but Rosa interrupted her. "Now, the truth must survive." While her children escaped through a secondary exit, Rosa confronted Sullivan and his men. "Looking for something, Marcus?" "Mrs. Alvarez," he smiled coldly. "Mr. Henderson is very disappointed with your lack of loyalty." "My loyalty has always been to the truth," she replied, buying time as she listened to her children's distant footsteps. As was Margaret's. Sullivan's smile disappeared. Margaret Henderson made the mistake of thinking she could change things, just like her husband. "So you really did kill Carlos," said Rosa, her voice shaking with restrained anger. "Accidents happen to people who ask too many questions," replied Sullivan, gesturing for his men to move forward. At that moment, sirens began to sound in the distance. Diana had called the police as soon as she realized they were being followed. The distraction was enough for Rosa to escape down a side passage, but not before she heard Sullivan on the phone. "Mr. Henderson, we have a problem. The evidence, they've done it." Reuniting with the group in a new safe location, Rosa discovered that Diana had gained more allies. 3 retired federal judges, old friends of Morrison, were willing to hear the case. "Janet is alive," Diana informed them. "I managed to locate her. She's scared, but safe." Miguel and Lucia worked frantically to copy and distribute the evidence found in the warehouse. The external hard drive contained years of detailed records, recorded conversations, compromising emails. "Margaret thought of everything," said Lucia, examining the files. "She knew she'd need more than her diary to bring Benjamin down." Night fell over Providence as the group planned their next move. Benjamin Henderson had moved up his press conference to the following morning, clearly trying to get ahead of any exposure. "Tomorrow," said Rosa, looking at Margaret's letter, "we'll finish what Carlos and Margaret started." What neither of them knew was that Benjamin Henderson was also preparing his final blow, a desperate move that could cost more than just reputations. The truth was about to come out, but its price would be exacted in blood. The conference room of the Biltmore Hotel was buzzing with the presence of the local and national press. Benjamin Henderson III, impeccable in his Italian suit, was preparing to announce the sale of Henderson Industries. Outside, Rosa and her group occupied strategic positions, ready for the final showdown. "Team 1 in position," whispered Miguel over the communicator. He and 3 volunteer lawyers from the Civil Rights Clinic were positioned at the side entrances. "Team 2 ready," Lucia replied. She had obtained press credentials through her contacts at the local newspaper and was now mingling with the reporters with a team of investigative journalists. Diana Walsh, accompanied by 2 retired federal judges, was waiting in the hotel lobby. Janet Martinez, who had been rescued the night before from a shed on the outskirts of the city, was safe in an undisclosed location, broadcasting her statement live to federal authorities. Rosa watched everything from her cleaning station, discreetly pushing her trolley through the hotel corridors. Margaret Henderson's diary was safe, but her revelations were about to explode like a carefully timed time bomb. "Ladies and gentlemen," Benjamin Henderson began, his confident voice echoing through the microphone. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter in the history of Henderson Industries." "Mr. Henderson," interrupted Lucia, standing up among the journalists, "could you comment on the systematic embezzlement of the employees' pension fund between 2008 and 2018? Benjamin's smile faltered for a split second. Marcus Sullivan, sitting in the front row, stood up abruptly. "What about the suspicious death of Margaret Henderson?" continued another journalist, following the planned script. "Is there any evidence linking her death to the findings of corporate fraud?" Benjamin adjusted his tie, his face hardening. "These allegations are completely unfounded. We have documents that prove dash." "These documents?" interrupted Miguel, projecting the files found on Margaret's hard drive onto the screens in the lounge. Bank transfers, compromising emails, and audio recordings filled the screens. Chaos ensued in the room. Benjamin tried to end the press conference, but the main doors were blocked by federal agents who had just arrived with search and seizure warrants. Benjamin Henderson III announced a strong voice from the entrance. It was Attorney General Morrison, recovered from his accident and accompanied by a team of investigators. You are under federal investigation for fraud, tax evasion, and possible involvement in homicide. Marcus Sullivan pulled out a gun, causing panic in the crowd. Before he could act, he was overpowered by plainclothes agents who had infiltrated the journalists. Rosa watched the scene unfold, her heart pounding as she saw Benjamin Henderson being handcuffed. Through the windows of the hall, she could see more cars arriving, their blue and red lights illuminating the historic facade of the Biltmore. "This is for you, Carlos," she whispered, holding the crucifix her husband had given her. In the weeks that followed, the truth came out in all its magnitude. The Hendersons' fraud scheme was even bigger than they had imagined, involving local politicians and corrupt judges. The federal investigation expanded to other companies in the region, revealing a network of corruption that spanned decades. The pension fund was recovered through the confiscation of the Hendersons' assets and their shell companies. Former employees and their families would finally receive what was owed to them, with interest and corrections. Margaret Henderson was posthumously recognized as a heroine who sacrificed her life for the truth. Her diary and the evidence she left behind not only exposed the Hendersons' crimes, but also served as a catalyst for reforms to the laws protecting corporate pension funds. "Your mother is a very brave woman," Diana told Miguel and Lucia during the awards ceremony, where Rosa was receiving the Rhode Island Citizenship Award. She not only honored the memory of her father, but changed the lives of hundreds of families. Rosa, on the podium, looked at her children in the audience. "This victory is not mine," she said into the microphone. "It belongs to all those who had the courage to stand up to injustice. It belongs to Margaret Henderson, who paid with her life to defend the truth. It belongs to my husband Carlos, who never stopped believing that justice would prevail." Benjamin Henderson III was sentenced to 30 years in prison. Marcus Sullivan, in exchange for a reduced sentence, revealed details of other corporate crimes, including the circumstances of Carlos and Margaret's deaths. The Henderson Mansion was transformed into a community center where former employees and their families could receive legal and financial assistance. Rosa continued to work there, now as an administrator, ensuring that the place that once housed so much corruption became a symbol of hope and justice. One quiet afternoon, while organizing the last documents in the case, Rosa found one last entry in Margaret's diary, written just hours before her death. "Truth has its price, but silence costs even more. To those who find these words, never stop fighting for what is right, even when the path seems impossible. Justice may take time, but it always finds its way." Rosa closed her diary, looking out the window of the community center at the garden where Carlos used to work. Spring was coming, and with it, new flowers were starting to bloom. It was a reminder that even after the harshest winters, life always finds a way to begin again. The struggle for justice and providence had ended, but its impact would continue to reverberate for generations. The story of a cleaning lady who defeated a corporate empire became a symbol of hope for workers across the country, proving that the truth, no matter how long buried, always finds a way to come to light.